A profound silence was demanded of me regarding the events that transpired immediately following my wedding night. Scarcely 36 hours after the ceremony concluded, I found myself perched on the paper liner of Dr. Hale's examination table, squeezing a pearl button tightly inside my hand. At 19 years old, breathing sent sharp pains shooting through my ribcage, and the air around me was thick with the scent of rubbing alcohol mixed with damp wool. On the other side of the translucent glass pane, my new mother-in-law stood watch alongside our bishop. Dr. Hale examined the dark bruising discoloration near my shoulder before asking in a hushed tone whether someone had trapped me inside that room. From the corridor, a woman's warning voice cut through, urging me to remember my oath. I parted my lips to speak just as the heavy sound of my husband's footsteps faded down the hall. To make sense of why I nearly allowed him to walk away, it is necessary to revisit the winter months when my mother and father first revealed that my life would be joined to Daniel Greyber. The year was 1978, and our family farm occupied the northern boundary of a tiny Ohio district. In the community where I was raised, major life choices were considered far too critical to be left to an individual. Instead, they were settled by families. The shifting emotions of the young were dismissed as fleeting, whereas land holdings, communal standing, and congregational harmony were treated as permanent foundations. The previous autumn, my father had suffered a severe hip injury when a wagon tongue snapped unexpectedly. Although he managed to continue working, his movements were slow and labored, and each step seemed to demand a private toll he refused to acknowledge. As winter set in, Bishop Jacob Greyber began making regular evening visits to our home. My mother would fastidiously wipe down the kitchen table multiple times even after it was spotless, and my father would request that my younger sisters retire upstairs. My presence was permitted only because I had reached 19, an age where any confidential discussion behind our doors likely dictated my own path. Bishop Greyber was a heavily built man with silver streaks through his beard, possessing a voice so deeply serene that any opposing view suddenly seemed immature. The bishop had provided financial relief for my father's medical bills, and had further supplied the seed required for our upcoming spring crops. Within our circles, no one labeled this a debt. It was simply spoken of as neighborly assistance. One particular night, the bishop placed his folded hands upon our table and remarked that his oldest son, Daniel, was in need of a spouse possessing a stable and steadfast disposition. My mother instantly froze, a drying towel resting against her plate. Daniel was 27, a reserved man highly respected throughout the district for his exquisite carpentry skills, having crafted cabinetry for nearly every household in the area. Our interactions over the course of my life amounted to perhaps 6 brief exchanges, none lasting more than a few moments. My father noted that Daniel was a dedicated laborer, to which Bishop Greyber responded that the young man required a tranquil household. That specific reply lingered in my mind because it felt distinctly unaligned with the observation. When I inquired why Daniel had remained unmarried for so long, my father's expression hardened immediately. The bishop explained that his son had previously courted another young woman, but she had chosen to abandon the church for the outside world, adding that people frequently confuse an unsettled spirit with bravery. My mother set her dish down with enough force that the impact rattled against the wood. That was the precise moment I realized a completely separate arrangement had been hammered out long before I walked into the room. Even so, I raised no objections. I desperately wanted my father's physical suffering to lessen. I longed for my mother to stop waking in the dark hours of the morning to calculate our financial obligations, and above all, I wished to be viewed as a helpful contributor, rather than an added financial strain. Young women in our district were never explicitly commanded to marry in the harsh manner outsiders frequently imagine. No authority figure stood over me wielding a written decree. The coercion was far more quiet and insidious. My father spoke continuously of our family's deep gratitude, my mother emphasized long-term security, and the bishop focused entirely on holy obedience. By the time my own desires were finally questioned, any response other than complete agreement had been framed as entirely self-centered. Daniel subsequently began arriving at our home on Sunday afternoons. He stood much taller than my memory dictated, possessing precise, deliberate hands and a distinct tendency to fix his gaze upon the floorboards before uttering a word. Whenever my younger sisters entered the space, his face would break into a warm smile. He politely expressed gratitude whenever my mother offered him pie, even on the occasions he chose not to eat it. While he lacked conventional charm, he carried an air of gentleness that mattered deeply to me. On his third visit, our walk took us out to the perimeter fence bordering the orchard. My youngest sister trailed behind us at a safe distance, as unwed couples in our community were strictly forbidden from being left entirely unchaperoned. Daniel asked if the aroma of freshly milled pine appealed to me, and I affirmed that it did. He then shared that he was actively constructing a cedar chest intended for our house. The phrase "our house" sent a sudden warmth flushing through my cheeks, despite the reality that he was still very much a stranger to me. Then, his tone shifted as he noted that people would likely share certain stories regarding his past. I waited in silence for him to elaborate. He rubbed his thumb across a rough splinter embedded in the wooden fence rail, claiming that the majority of those rumors were entirely false. When I pressed him for details, his eyes darted back toward the house where my mother stood pressed against the kitchen window, making a superficial show of washing the glass. Lowering his voice significantly, Daniel mentioned that his father firmly believed the past should stay buried forever. Before I could ask for clarification, my sister shouted from across the yard that mother required my assistance inside. Later that evening, I recounted Daniel's puzzling words to my mother.